How's it going, everyone? This is Boots with Snapkeep Arcade, back with Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism for another standard deck guide. This week we'll be talking about Sultai Midrange, a deck that takes the shell of Golgari Midrange and splashes blue for some amazing spells. Thanks for joining us, Spencer. Tell us about Sultai Midrange.
Yeah, so oftentimes when a new set comes out, especially in such a small standard, people like to look at this big, new, exciting stuff and all these new archetypes that open up, right? You got 5 new guilds, all 10 wedges are now available to us. So people are kind of going crazy on the different stuff that they can do. But at the same time, the best deck also got upgrades, and today we're going to talk about how black-green might be changing and what the cards it got. So the first thing that we should highlight is the fact that if you watched earlier this week's video, you know that we're pretty high on Hydroid Krasis. Well, so is everybody else. The card is in fact probably the best card, and it is right now the most expensive card in all of Ravnica Allegiance because it's insane. The card is so good, and there's no reason that black-green couldn't splash blue for that and negate and some other stuff and just incorporate it into its game plan, its go-long game plan with Wildgrowth Walker, Merfolk Branchwalker, and Jadelight Ranger. So pretty often, if you've played a lot of black-green in the past, you were really used to just like playing out your Wildgrowth Walker, slowing the game down till you won with a Vivien Reid or with Carnage Tyrant, clearing the board with Finality, stuff like that. This deck actually doesn't play that different. The difference is that its top end goes way bigger with Hydroid Krasis. And one of the things that was really funny is early on in testing, we were testing the team at Ramp deck. I was like, man, this deck would be so good if I just had more Hydroid Krasis. And one of the people I was working on the deck with was like, well, why don't you just play Finality? And it was funny. It was like, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well just play black green, right? And we kind of laughed about it. And then as things went on, we saw that that actually works out. You know, you get more Hydroid Krasis with your Finality, similar to how you were getting back your Wildgrowth Walker and your Jadelight Rangers to prolong the game even further. And Hydroid Krasis just happens to do a better job of all of it. The old deck, what it would do is you would trade off your resources with Merfolk Branchwalker, Wildgrowth Walker, and Jadelight Ranger, get them back with Find, pull ahead with Vivien Reid, and end the game that way. This deck does the exact same thing, except that when you cast a Hydroid Krasis for 6 and have a 6/6 flyer and draw 3 cards and gain 3 life, it's a significantly bigger impact on the game. And the only downside to it is that it's not that amazing against opposing Vivien Reids. So the fact that it has flying is kind of its biggest weakness almost. But only in the mirror match. The other thing that this steel deck would do is it would have a lot of 2-for-1s in the form of, if you look at Ravenous Chupacabra, Vivien Reid, even Vraska, things like that, you would have a lot of Flame Tongue Kavu effects, right? These creatures or permanents that would come down, kill something, and provide an extra value throughout the game. This, because you're splashing blue, you actually get to play one of the best Flame Tongue Kavus of all time in Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker is pretty insane because when it enters the battlefield, if you haven't played this before, you get to exile an artifact or a creature. So you can exile opposing artifacts, which is pretty cool. And then you can actually cast those cards. So if you top deck this card off your Hydroid Krasis with a ton of mana, you can come down, play it, steal maybe their Jadelight Ranger or something like that, and then play their Jadelight Ranger to get even extra value off of your removal spell. In the past, I've been a huge advocate of Druid of the Cowl in these decks. You know, you play Druid of the Cowl, you get to get to your Vivien Reids faster, you get to get to your Carnage Tyrants faster, you get to get to your Vraskas or your cards, whichever Planeswalker you're playing in that 4 slot, a lot faster. Incubation Druid is so much better because you play it on turn 2, you play a Vraska, and then you can activate this card, make it a 3/5, and it just clogs up the board. It also makes a ton of mana for Hydroid Krasis and Carnage Tyrant. I think the thing that we should talk about here is how I've built this deck a little bit differently. So one of the things that I've noticed people moving away from is a correct number of interaction against certain decks. So I really like Assassin's Trophy right now. I know that it ramps your opposing decks, but for a lot of decks, that's not mattering so much in this format. So I like playing 3 2-mana removal spells. I like playing 1 Carnage Tyrant to kind of trump certain type of decks that can't deal with 1 large creature. The same thing could be true of Hydroid Krasis, but it's actually significantly easier to deal with a 4/4 than it is to deal with a 7/6 on curve. And then I think the other thing that we should talk about is, Memorial of Folly and Golgari Findbroker. You don't have to build the deck this way. One of the reasons that I like this is it gives you advantages in the mirror match, and it gives you advantages with very little sacrifice. Having 1 tap land in your entire deck is totally okay. The difference with Memorial Folly now is that you have you have lands that are like Hinterland Harbor, but I don't think that matters over something like a swamp. So it's a given poll that you have to decide, do I want 4 Hydroid Krasis? Is Golgari Findbroker an extra Hydroid Krasis, right? Because it can get it back. And you got to kind of decide where you want to give and take in your mid-range deck lists. And that's really important. For example, you'll notice that we were a big advocate of Karn last season. We're not playing any Karn. I'm playing Vraska, Golgari Queen. And one of the reasons for that is because Rhythm of the Wild is so popular. And I want as many main deck answers to Rhythm of the Wild as possible. And these are just things that you have to think about when building your mid-range decks. One of the things that I was thinking of trying, though, over the Carnage Tyrant is actually the big Vraska, because it does answer Wilderness Reclamation to give you a second answer. One of the problems, though, is that Vraska, while is one of the most powerful planeswalkers ever printed, has a really hard time in this format. I'm never really sure why Big Vraska has had such a hard time, because Vraska Relic Seeker is actually just one of my favorite cards of all time. I think the problem is that 2/2s get outclassed so fast in this format. However, her loyalty does go up to 8, but it's tough because there's so much mono red right now that it makes it so much harder for a card like Vraska like 6-mana Vraska to really end the game. Whereas Carnage Tyrant, if you land one of those, you usually win the game against mono red. So you have to decide what your big spells are going to do. Now, I will say that I'm really glad that people have decided that Llanowar Elves is correct. For a long time, people were trying to cut Llanowar Elves from this deck, and I think some number of ramp creatures is really good, and that if you see a list without them, I would encourage you to maybe try and fit in the Llanowar Elves.
Let's go over the sideboard.
All right, so one of the things that you get out of the sideboard by splashing blue that I actually think is really, really important because of the Wilderness Reclamation stage is Negate. Negate is so powerful. Being able to negate a Nexus of Fate is backbreaking for so many decks. One of the reasons that Nexus of Fate didn't end up getting banned in its original format is because people just started playing Negates, and then that deck started losing. And having 3 Duress and 3 Negate post-board against that deck, plus Thrashing Brontodon, plus main deck answers like, Assassin's Trophy, you're going to find that you have just enough stuff to disrupt them that you'll be able to get in with your creatures if you take their fogs and things like that early. The other thing that you'll notice about the sideboard is we have 2 Moment of Craving, 2 Cry of the Carnarium, and 2 Brontodon. This is a lot of aggro hate, and also mono red got a lot friggin' better. So you kind of need the big bodies to enable that. The other thing you'll notice is an extra Vraska's Contempt. I think anytime that you play against a deck with Rekindling Phoenix, you want as many Vraska's Contempt as possible, and that's really important. The sideboard also has a couple of extra control cards outside of the Duresses and the Negates. There's an Eldest Reborn and a Carnage Tyrant. The Eldest Reborn is much better against the Teferi control decks than it is against the non-Teferi control decks. So for example, if you're playing against Temur Nexus of Fate, you might not want to bring that in. Whereas if you're playing against Bant Nexus of Fate, you definitely want it because it gives you an extra answer to that Teferi. Carnage Tyrant is just a must-answer threat against control. So I want to have a couple of them in my main deck so that I can loop them, bring them back with things like Golgari Findbroker and Vine to overload their mass removal spells that kill Carnage Tyrant.
Let's talk about matchups.
Mono red is going to be one of the ones you have to think about the most. This actually comes up a lot with Incubation Druid and how you use it. One of the weaknesses of Incubation Druid is actually that it dies to shock. So you're already making your mono red matchup a little bit worse by playing like Watery Grave and Breeding Pool. But hopefully Wildgrowth Walker, the number of 2-mana removal spells you're using, kind of helps with that. An option that you do have, though, is that if it gets too bad, you can try and play different cards in the main deck to try and help with that. Hydroid Krasis does gain you life, so if you get to the end game, you can make a large Hydroid Krasis and gain life. The game is usually over, but you really are leaning on the back of that Wildgrowth Walker package to try and beat mono red. Whereas the same thing was true before, it just got a little bit harder for you. That's one of the reasons that Moment of the Craving is back on the board. One of the problems, though, is that mono red has turned into more of a burn deck, which makes it even tougher. However, anytime you can stick a Wildgrowth Walker, I recommend trying to do it off of a ramp spell so that you can play Wildgrowth Walker and Merfolk Branchwalker in the same turn, making your Wildgrowth Walker burn proof. That's kind of my biggest tip in that matchup. If we look at the mirror match, I think you're pretty favored if people are still on Black Rain. Hostage Taker and Hydroid Krasis are actually pretty insane in the mirror. Being to steal your opponent's Wildgrowth Walker and then playing it is probably just game ending a lot of the time if you have a bunch of Jadelight Rangers and Merfolk Branchwalkers to back it up. And then I think that there are control decks that we know about, whether it's just Blue Eye Control or Esper Control. I think that you're not favored until the board, and then you are favored. So you're pretty much a dog game one. The Hydroid Krasis really does help with that because one of the things things about it is it's a cast trigger, as we talked about last week, instead of a enter the battlefield trigger. So if you can get a big enough Hydroid Krasis to give you enough cards to overload their counter spells, you might be in good shape. But it's definitely something you have to play with in the main deck a little bit. But once you get to the sideboard and have those negates and duresses, you're a favorite. Outside of that, I think that we're not sure what the metagame looks like. So for example, right before this video started, I was watching the SCG, and there was a mono red Phoenix deck that the person looked like they had broken standard. So there are all kinds of decks coming out right now. The set is one of the most powerful sets that I've ever seen for standard specifically to warp and change the format. So there's a lot of things that'll be changing, which is one of the reasons that playing the best deck with some upgrades kind of is a good idea. You get to, more people have worked on black-green decks than probably any other deck in standard right now. So you have that hive mind helping you out, including us. We're trying to help you with that too.
Do you have any tips and tricks with Sultai midrange?
Just kind of the one I mentioned with the Merfolk Branchwalker, Wildgrowth Walker against mono red. I also think that understanding when to play your hostage taker will be important. Because if they kill the hostage taker, things come back. So that's something you got to remember. The other thing is, I think that people don't train ultimate their Vivien Reid enough. There are a lot of games that you'll just win by clogging the board plus ultimate, and that's something you should definitely be thinking about.
Any final thoughts on the deck?
Yeah, just once again, if you're watching on my channel, please check out Snapkeep Arcade, who does this video with me every week. We really appreciate it. It's really fun to do with them. You can support our content at patreon.com/ccmtg and on patreon.com/thetrophymages. Also, super shout out to Hydroid Krasis. It's probably going to go down as one of my favorite Magic cards of all time.
Thank you so much to Spencer Howland of Constructed Criticism for another deck guide. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to Snapkeep Arcade and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. This has been Boots with Snapkeep Arcade. Thanks for watching.